There's a lot of talk about .NET 10, Visual Studio 2026, and the new feature, Blazor co-hosting. But what does that actually mean? In this video, I'm going to try to get to the bottom of that. Just a couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with David Wengier, one of the engineers that have been working on this Blazor co-hosting feature. So I asked him, I know everyone is talking about it. It's usually just possibly it's a one slide. Maybe it's just one point in a slide. But it sounds like this is something that should be exciting, right? So I asked him, could you please explain that to me? So we had an hour together where he explained how everything works. But to understand what it is, we need to understand what it was. So let's take a look. This is what it used to be. So we had the editor. The editor, in this case Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, is talking to a Blazor language server. So the Blazor language server is responsible for handling the Blazor language. But here's where it gets a little bit tricky, because Blazor is a file type and not a language all on itself. It is actually a mix of C#, it is a mix of HTML, and you can also throw in like JavaScript and CSS in there as well. So the Blazor language service needs to communicate with the HTML language server as well as the C# language server. So it needs to talk to all of these different servers. And it does that using LSP messages. So it's sending language server protocol messages. And these are not typed messages, these are string messages. So it's sending these kinds of messages back and forth to the HTML server, which is reporting back a lot of errors, potentially at least a lot of errors. So the HTML language server is going to say, I don't know what this is. This is some kind of Blazor syntax, or it doesn't even know what that is. It just says this is not valid HTML. And now it's up to the language server, the Blazor language server, to say, okay, so we got all of these different things. Some of them are relevant, some of them are not. So I need to kind of filter that away from that list of errors. With the C# language server, it becomes even worse, because the Blazor language server, or the source generators, has already generated C# code for us. And then the C# language server is going to get this information, compile it, test it, and say, you know what, I have an error on line 100. Now, back in the Blazor language server, we might not even have a line 100. So now it's up to the Blazor language server to translate that error to a line in the actual Blazor code. So we got one world where the Blazor language server knows all the lines and all of that stuff. We got one world where the C# language server knows all of it. But it is two realities. And then when it comes to hot reload, we need to compile all of this again. So it gets really, really tricky when it comes to sending these LSP messages between these different servers. Now, if we go back here, it is in reality actually even more tricky, because a language server can't directly talk to another language server. So these lines are not entirely true. What is actually happening is that the Blazor language server is sending a message back to the editor. The editor then goes and talks to the C# language server or the HTML language server. The HTML language server is going to return a result back to the editor and then back to the Blazor language server. So there's a lot of latency and a lot of things involved to get this message across all the way. Now, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we can host the Razor language server together with the C# language server. One might even use the word co-host. And that's exactly what this new feature is all about. So let's bring in the new solution. So the new solution still has the editor over here, but now we have a world where inside of the C# language server, we are now hosting Razor language server endpoints because the Razor language server doesn't exist anymore. What it actually has is that the endpoints that used to be in the Razor language server is now hosted inside of the C# language server. And inside of here, we have the Roslyn compiler with analysis and all of that goodness. We have the Razor source generator running inside of the language server. We have the Razor language server endpoints, and here's the most important part, we have a shared syntax and semantic model. So suddenly, there's no longer two realities, it's one. It's the same reality, whether or not you're in the C# language server or if you're in Razor mode, if you will. So this means that we're going to have way less LSP messages, language server protocol messages. Nothing is going to go out in the editor and do stuff. We're still going to get HTML requests out there, but compared to the amount of C# in a Razor file, that is not even comparable. And then in the end, we got hot reload and we got the running app. So this feature is not really a really cool hot reload feature. So what they actually did was so much bigger than that. So they basically ripped out the language server, the Razor language server, and replaced it with a co-hosted version inside of the C# language server. Which also means that it's going to be less duplicated work. We're going to have better performance and this is, in my opinion, the more exciting part, more reliable hot reload in the end of it. But it doesn't end there, because we're also going to get a way better editor. So the Razor syntax is going to be faster, more reliable, and we're not going to end up in that state where there's red squiggles everywhere, but instead it's going to be handled way better. Now, is it perfect? No, it's not. But it's way, way better than it used to be. And honestly, if we're looking at the old way of doing things, I can't even imagine how the hot reload or even the editor could work that good considering what it was working with. So this is, in my opinion, probably the most exciting part in the .NET 10 and Visual Studio 2026 release for Blazor developers and, of course, Razor developers. So let me know what you think. Write in the comments below and tell me what your experience is. Is the new co-hosted Razor better? Worse? Are you seeing any performance improvements? And I also know that this is not the end of it. We're going to see continuous improvements coming as well. So this is just the first step, making everything else possible. So see you in the next video.